Hello, everybody, and welcome to another session of educational wine fun. This one, we're looking at the advanced version of grape varieties. Now, we've got many videos up of key grape varieties. Now we're going on to the slightly more obscure varieties. And on this one, we'll be looking at Primitivo, otherwise known as Zinfandel, amongst other names as well. So this is the advanced version. We also have a beginner's version, which is useful for say level 2 WSET, and this is more useful for level 3, 4 and above. Now, a few things. My name is Jimmy Smith. I am the owner of West London Wine School, South London Wine School, and Streatham Wine House, which is a cool wine bar in South London. We hold a huge amount of tastings and courses per year, have over around 6,000 students coming through our school per year, including Wine Scholar Guild, WSET, and others. All of the websites are down there, and we're going to crack on with Primitivo. So first of all, interestingly, what we know about Primitivo and Zinfandel. Now, Zinfandel is the new world name for it, namely in North America. Primitivo is our kind of Latin-based, so this is our Roman-based, therefore Southern Italy. But in fact, it does have another name, which is Tribodrag. And Tribodrag, also you'll see it written as Tzrjenak Kastelanski. So Tzrjenak Kastelanski, which is a Croatian name. And we know that the origins of this grape variety is Croatia, around the Dalmatian coast. We have gone all the way back with a very famous person who is called Carol Meredith. And Carol Meredith of the Davis University in California studied this a lot during the 1990s, and in fact set up something called a Zin Quest. And the Zin Quest was to find out, in fact, the true origins of the variety. So we with some studying, she realized, and some genetic work, she realized that Primitivo and Zinfandel were the same. But then she wanted to actually find out the true identity of it, what we think is the birthplace, and we think it's around Dalmatia and the Croatian coastal zone. Now, the Croatian word Tribodrag, which is not the most common name for the vine that is found in Croatia, and there's a good sort of 20,000 vines now in Croatia. The name actually comes from a Greek word that means early ripening, and this fits in quite nicely. Without the genetic coding, this fits in quite nicely for the etymology, because the etymology, therefore, of early ripening of the Greek word would link Primitivo, which is the Latin Roman word, which also means early ripener, primitivus, early ripener. So it links quite nicely with the etymology there. So that's another reason we know that it's from. So we know it's called Primitivo in Italy. It was originally called Zagrese, and that is derived from Zagreb, and that comes from around the 18th century. But its first mention was 1799 in Primitivo by a priest in Giodocolle. And Giodocolle is quite a famous part of Puglia, which today makes very good, slightly fresher Primitivo wines grown at higher altitudes on the Merch, on the limestone-based soils of that area. So we do have a mentioning then right at the end of the 18th century of Primitivo, but other names like Zagarese beforehand. Of course, it's called Zinfandel in the US of A. Now, we believe that it was introduced into the United States via Vienna, via the Schönbrunn Imperial Collection, where it was moved across into the States, found its way into places like Finger Lakes in the eastern seaboard, but of course California, where it's been a significant player, but was called Zinfandel in the 1800s. Yeah, very different name, and that's why it was. There were thoughts that it may be linked, but it wasn't actually proved until only around 30 years ago that it is the same as Primitivo. So as I mentioned, it was thought to be the same, and a bit of work was done by a guy called Wade Wolf of the Davis University. And this is pre-DNA profiling. So he was looking at studying it. He traveled across Apulia, realized there were some similarities between the look of the grape, the ampelography, the leaf formation, and some of its traits. So therefore, this is what started this kind of fascination that the variety must be linked, or there should be a strong link to it, Zinfandel to Primitivo. And yes, when DNA profiling was first sort of rolled out en masse and within universities, key universities in the world, Carol Meredith, who I mentioned, who was on that Zin quest to find out the origins of Zinfandel, confirmed it as the same, and then went further, worked with a couple of Croatian ampelographers to find out, in fact, that it is from Croatia. So the kind of movement is therefore Croatia through to Italy, and then via Vienna to the New World, such as the United States. Now, Primitivo and Zinfandel is a rather productive variety, so quite vigorous, very productive. Some yields can be significant. So it is in fact very well suited, or better suited rather, to low fertile soils, which would restrict its possibility of growth, of volume of grapes. So it is certainly can be found on big alluvium fertile soils, and that's where you get huge volumes, and that's where you can get productions like cheap Zinfandels and white Zinfandels, for instance, and also the same with Primitivo. It is an early ripener, hence its name, early to mid ripening. Often in southern Italy, the variety will be picked in August in Puglia. So being picked that early means it races along to maturity, picking up a lot of sugar, therefore potentially quite high alcohol. So I'll get to that a little. Zinfandel is interesting, being a slightly younger variety in the sense that it was planted later than Primitivo, so less of an affinity to its landscape. It hasn't become so well in tuned with its landscape as much, of course, as Primitivo has. So Zinfandel as a variety is a bit of an uneven ripener. So cluster by cluster, but moreover, berry by berry, you will have different speeds of ripening, which means this is quite a viticultural nightmare for a viticulturalist. They have to work quite extensively on hand selection to make sure that they have the right berries. And of course, this isn't always done. You may find that some grape growers will err on the side of caution, picking a little bit later, just to make sure that most of the ripe is fruit. But that means you will get some overripe fruit, and hence these kind of raisined characteristics or dried fruit characteristics in the wine. Some, though, may find to pick a little bit more earlier, and this is where herbaceous notes will tend to come through in Zinfandels. Primitivo is a little bit more at affinity with its local climate. It's a little bit more consistent. There are some more bunches, and they're more compact as well. So you will find Primitivo producing a slightly sort of more consistent based crop from it. Primitivos from Puglia do tend to be quite ripe, if not dried, and quite raisiny, exceedingly hot and dry in Puglia, very much lacking in rainfall in that area. So therefore, these wines do tend to be more concentrated with sugars and a bit more kind of intensity of dry. Moderate and colourful skins. So you may possibly find some darker styles, certainly in Italy. Zinfandels tend to have a little bit more elegance behind them in their colour, but in terms of density, sorry, but their colours will tend to be quite significant. You can get quite purpley looking ones. There's a lot of anthocyanin pigmentation found in the skin. So you can get certainly some quite exotically purpley reddish colours. And in Italy, in Puglia, you will find that the vine actually goes through what's called albarello training. And albarello is bush vines. It's southern Italian bush vines. Sometimes these are adapted and actually grown in holes to take in water to trap moisture. But Albarredo is the key kind of process here. There has been a movement towards guillo, and as guillo is easier to maintain, mechanical harvesting is possible. So there is certainly movements towards guillo for more mass-produced Primitivo. In the winery, Zinfandel and Primitivo, normally you will find this as a varietal, so a single varietal, certainly in Italy and in Croatia, and often in the US. But you do, of course, find in the US Zinfandel being blended. Just think about one of the great wineries, Ridge, who make their Geyserville, their Lytton Springs, which are majorly Zinfandel, but often topped up with somewhere between sort of 5 to 30% of other varietals. So that is possible, but Zinfandel certainly is often found on its own. In Italy, we have recorded Primitivos at 17%. Sorry, it says 17 degrees there, but 17%. So quite high alcohols can be possible, and that's, of course, because of its fast, effective buildup of sugars in a short growing season. It is for these reasons that you tend to have less bitter, astringent tannin with these varietals, because they do not, and they are not enabled to ripen the physiological side of the grape because of the quick sugar ripening. So often you will find Primitivos being full-bodied, rich, alcoholic, but quite soft and ripe with its tannins, and not so astringent. For that reason, they become quite liked in the mass market. I call it the Malbec effect. It's very similar to Malbec styles in Mendoza in Argentina. Big, rich, but soft and smooth with tannin. In Italy, there's a bit of cold soaking, which is increasing to produce a bit more brightness of aromas. Some winemakers will mention that this is a benefit of cold soaking is for color. No science has actually been apparently put behind that, but certainly a lot of winemakers will do it for brighter aroma characteristic. So I am told many times. Scientists, you can moan all you want about it, but winemakers do tell me that a lot. Oak will be used, certainly in the United States. American oak is commonly used. You can use a bit of French, of course, as well, but oak is used and adds a lot of flavor and aroma. And for certainly the better areas of Puglia, like Manduria and Giotocolle, you will find that oak is being used more commonly there as well. So you may find cedary, tobacco-y characteristics, often Slovenian-based oak. So, Slavonian-based, so Croatian. Puglia then produces very full-bodied, ripe styles, erring on dried fruit and licorice characteristics with quite high alcohols. Zinfandels in the US are a real mixed bag. So first up, there are white Zinfandels. This is the name given to light skin contact rosé Zinfandels, normally of high mass production levels. Think Gallo, Blossom Hill, etc. These are often unfinished fermentations with therefore residual sugar being anywhere between sort of 30 to 50 grams per litre, potentially more, producing medium sweet, rosé, kind of pinkish, neon-like rosé style wines, which are quite common in the mass market. Underripe Zinfandel with grapes that have had not full time to ripen, so picking a little bit early, you can have herbaceous, green, slightly stalky characteristics, minty notes. But then there are the ripe and full-bodied styles with more aging on the vine and maybe raisined fruit. And then the complex, powerful styles from very high quality estates like Ravenswood and Ridge that will, and things like Grigich as well, which will produce wonderful wines with heavy sorting, correct ripening, blending of barrels. Oak will be used, making these wonderfully poised, complex Zinfandels, which are quite premium because of the amount of effort and work that has to go into them. There aren't many places that we find Primitivo, Zinfandel, or its Croatian names like Jurljernak, Kastelanski, or Triberberg, as it's also known. The US produces the most of this variety today, as Zinfandel, of course, nearly 20,000 hectares, mainly in California. The volume of that will be in the Central Valley. The higher quality stuff will be around Sonoma, will be around Napa, and Dry Creek Valley, those kind of zones. Some good stuff also, more affordable, in Lodi. Puglia, about 11,000 hectares, pretty much exclusively in Puglia, and that is famous around places like Manduria, also Giodocolle, two that I've mentioned before, two of the slightly better. Manduria being quite powerful. There's even sweet examples as well of those sweet red wines, quite famous in that area. Croatia, like I've mentioned, about 200,000 vines today, but I couldn't find the exact numbers of how many vines are in play. But of course, this is the birth of the landscape, and they're re-emerging with this production. What does it taste like? It's such a mixed bag because of the different production methods, the rosés, etc. Rosés will tend to be, because of light skin contact, very sort of strawberried, raspberried, confected, what you would expect, and quite sweet with those. But the red wines, such as Primitivo and Zinfandels, will tend to be sort of black cherry, blackberry, and of course, remember, this can be super ripe, sometimes more kind of liqueur. So you may find cassis or a blackberry liqueur, or overripe, so things like raisin, fig, and prune. Vanilla, licorice could be found, oaky characteristics, all in this picture. And then, of course, if there is an underripeness, you may find quite a mixed bag of herbaceous notes, often things like thyme, rosemary, but also things like mint. Okay, so that's the real key styles of them. They are quite full, quite powerful wines. Tannins and acids, like I've already mentioned. Now, in the States, they can go up to quite high levels of tannins with the correct winemaking techniques. But normally, Zins, both in California and Primitivo in Italy, will be full-bodied, will be quite high in alcohol, but will have balanced tannins, quite soft and smooth and ripe, not bitter or astringent. Acidities can vary depending on acidification, if that has been added, and it may well be a lot of the time to give a counterpoint to the kind of intensity of the wine. And oak can be a key factor, slightly for the more premium styles. So I hope you've enjoyed your section on Primitivo and Zinfandel. These are my details again. So @WineWithJimmy is my personal handles for both Instagram and Twitter. Please get in touch with any comments and questions. West London Wine School, South London Wine School, and my wine bar, Streatham Winehouse. Please remember that this is by no means the most comprehensive video, but certainly gives you a lot of food for thought, or wine for thought, and hopefully you have learned something, and hopefully it will help you with your studies. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.